Welcome back to our deep dive. There is this prevailing wisdom in business, and honestly, it is taught in almost every MBA program out there.
Right. The idea that scale is absolutely everything.
Exactly. Scale is everything. If you can just get big enough, you win. You crush the competition, you dictate terms to your
You
suppliers.
dominate the market.
Yeah, it is the classic Walmart model, right? Bigger is always better.
It is that traditional empire-building mindset. You consolidate, you leverage, and you dominate. And, I mean, it works for groceries. It works for logistics.
It does. But today, we are unpacking a story where bigger was absolutely not better.
Not at all.
It was really just a bigger target for failure. We are looking at the spectacular, messy, and frankly incredibly expensive implosion of a luxury retail empire.
The merger of Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus.
Exactly, because this is a case study that proves when you combine two massive debt-ridden companies, you don't get a giant.
No, you get a zombie.
A zombie that just burns cash. And to guide us through this wreckage today, we're relying on a really scathing and incredibly detailed analysis. It is titled Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue Part 2, When Debt Met Delusion.
Such a great title.
It really is. And this comes from Lilian Raji, writing for Forbes.
And this is not just, an outsider throwing stones at a glass house.
Yeah.
Lilian is the perfect guide for this deep dive because she understands the actual soul of this industry.
She really does. And I actually want to give you her full background right up front so you understand the weight of this critique, because she is a heavy hitter in this space.
Yeah, she has the credentials.
Right. So she is a global luxury communications advisor, fractional CMO, columnist, and president of the Lilian Raji agency, where for over 2 decades she served as trusted strategic advisor for some of the world's leading luxury brands. She is also founder of the PR Advisor, a platform inspired by her decade-long National Jeweler magazine column, offering communications PR guidance and training for emerging to mid-sized brands. Her Forbes column, The Pursuit of Luxury, examines how luxury brands use emotional marketing to capture their very passionate customers.
So when Lilian says these companies forgot the customer, she knows exactly what she's talking about. She has spent 20 years helping brands talk to those exact customers.
Absolutely. So our mission today for this deep dive is to analyze Lilian's breakdown of how these two iconic names, Saks and Neiman Marcus, were essentially hollowed out by ego, massive amounts of debt, and just a fundamental misunderstanding of what a luxury shopper actually wants from them.
It is a tragedy in 4 acts, really. And it starts with a power struggle that kind of sets the tone for everything that follows.
Okay, let's unpack this. The central figure here is Richard Baker. He is the guy behind Hudson's Bay Company, which owned Saks. And his dream, his white whale, basically was to buy Neiman Marcus. He had been chasing it for years.
Right. And you really have to understand the logic here from his perspective. Baker's theory was simple. He thought, if I buy Neiman Marcus, I will own roughly 55% of the wholesale luxury business in the United States.
55%. That is a massive chunk of the market. I mean, in almost any other industry, if you control 55% of the distribution, you are the king.
Exactly. And in Baker's mind, that market share directly equals leverage. He thought, if I control the shelf space, I can bully the brands.
Right.
He genuinely thought he could dictate terms to the Guccis and the Louis Vuittons of the world because, well, in his mind, where else were they going to go?
He thought he was the ultimate gatekeeper. But as Lilian points out in her analysis, he completely forgot who he was dealing with. And this leads to my absolute favorite part of the article.
The Bernard Arnault story.
Yes. There is this specific moment where Richard Baker tried to flex his muscles against Bernard Arnault.
The chairman of LVMH, the Cashmere Wolf, as they call him.
The Cashmere Wolf. I love that nickname.
Arnault is the richest man in France, often the richest in the entire world. He owns the brands that people actually want. He essentially is the luxury market.
Right. So the story goes, and Lilian actually quotes a former Saks executive here, that Baker made a stink with Arnault.
A stink.
Yeah, presumably trying to throw his weight around during negotiations, maybe demanding better margins, or just treating LVMH like they were just another run-of-the-mill vendor.
Which is an incredibly dangerous move. You don't tug on Superman's cape, and you definitely don't make a stink with the Cashmere Wolf.
So what actually happened? Did Arnault yell at him? Did he call his lawyers?
No. Arnault didn't negotiate at all. He just acted.
What did he do?
He closed the Louis Vuitton shop inside the Saks in New Orleans. Shut it right down.
Just like that. But did he leave the New Orleans market entirely?
Not at all. He simply opened a standalone Louis Vuitton shop in the mall right next to Saks.
Oh, wow. And what was the financial result of that?
He dragged $15 million worth of volume right out of Saks and into his own store.
$15 million.
Yeah.
Just gone overnight because Baker annoyed him.
It was a $15 million lesson in power dynamics. Arnaud was basically showing him, you are just the real estate. I am the destination.
Yeah.
People do not go to Saks to look at the drywall or the lighting fixtures. They go to buy Louis Vuitton. If Louis Vuitton moves next door, the customer moves next door.
That is such a crucial distinction for us to understand. In the old days, the department store was the curator. They were the ones who decided what was cool. But Lilian seems to be saying that dynamic has completely flipped.
Completely flipped.
Right.
And here is the thing that really baffles me. Lilian writes that instead of learning from this, instead of realizing that maybe the brands actually hold the cards, Baker doubled down.
He doubled down.
Yeah, he was convinced that his math was just wrong because he wasn't big enough yet.
He thought, if I finally buy Neiman Marcus, then the math changes. Then I'm truly too big to ignore.
That is the delusion part of Lilian's title. He thought a failing luxury retailer could absorb another struggling competitor, and somehow, magically, two negatives would make a positive.
So let's talk about that actual acquisition, because Baker finally gets his wish, right? He buys Neiman Marcus in December 2024. On paper, he thinks he is buying an absolute titan.
But according to Lilian's analysis, he was buying a shell, a Trojan horse that was already completely rotten on the inside.
We tend to think of Neiman Marcus as this absolute pinnacle of service, right? The famous Neiman's Dip, the personal shoppers who know your kids' birthdays.
Operationally, yes, absolutely. Lilian makes a very clear distinction here. The staff at Neiman's were superior. They really knew clienteling. They knew how to make you feel incredibly special.
But the corporate side.
The corporate structure was a disaster zone.
And this is where we get into the debt part of debt met delusion. Because Neiman's wasn't just a store anymore. It was basically a financial instrument.
Exactly. Neiman's had been passed around by private equity firms for years, like a hot potato. First, TPG and Warburg Pincus, then Ares and the Canada Pension Plan.
And every time it was sold,
the buyers loaded it up with more and more debt.
Can we break that down for a second for the listener? Because private equity debt can sound a bit abstract. What does that actually look like for the day-to-day business?
Think of it like buying a house. You take out a massive second mortgage on the house to pay yourself a huge cash dividend. And then you leave the house to deal with the monthly payments. You've got your cash, but the house is now drowning underwater.
So the business is trying to operate, trying to buy clothes, pay its staff, keep the lights on, but it has this massive financial anchor around its neck.
Precisely. Lilian uses the term metastasis to describe the debt. It was spreading and actively killing the host.
Wow.
Before their bankruptcy in 2020, their earnings were crashing, but their interest payments alone were soaring to $300 million a year.
$300 million just in interest. That is almost $1 million a day just to service the debt.
You cannot survive that. No amount of selling handbags covers that kind of hole. And Lilian points out that the leadership at Neiman's, specifically the CEO Jeffrey Van Ramdonk, did not help matters at all.
This was a really scathing part of the article. There is a quote from an analyst that says Van Ramdonk didn't save them from bankruptcy, he took them right into it.
Right. And the main critique is that he focused on theatrics over actual operations. For example, he was managing the company remotely from New York, even though the headquarters is in Dallas.
Which, in the retail world, sends a terrible message to the staff working on the floor.
It alienated the brands, too. Lilian notes that Gucci actually pulled their distribution from NeimanMarcus.com during his tenure.
Oh, that hurts.
Yeah, when you are a luxury department store and you lose Gucci online, you are in serious, serious trouble.
But, you know, the biggest bombshell for me in this entire section was about the inventory. Lilian quotes Sidney Sheinberg, a bankruptcy attorney, and he reveals that Neiman's had the highest percentage of consignment goods of any major retailer.
This is huge, and it is a detail that might seem small to an outsider, but it changes the entire business model.
Right. Consignment means the store doesn't even own the stuff.
They're just a showroom.
So they're essentially just acting as a landlord for clothes.
Essentially, yes.
Oh.
In a traditional retail model, the store buys the dress, they own it, they have real skin in the game. If it doesn't sell, they lose money.
Oh, it's in consignment.
In consignment, the brand still owns it. The store is just renting out the rack space.
Why does that matter so much for the shopper, though?
Because it means the store isn't curating anymore. They aren't acting as a true merchant with a point of view. They're just a venue. And when you combine that with the fact that Saks was also moving heavily in this direction, well, you can see where this is going.
Let's pivot to Saks then, because while Neiman's was drowning in private equity debt, Saks was actively destroying itself with spreadsheets.
Yes. Enter Mark Metrick, the CEO of Saks.
Lillian's sources describe him as the best numbers guy in the business, which, sounds like a compliment on the surface.
Until they add the second part of that quote.
Lazy merchant.
Lazy merchant. Ouch.
That is a stinging critique in this industry.
The criticism is that he mastered Excel, but not the sales floor.
Yeah.
He thought you could run a luxury empire by looking at cells on a spreadsheet, rather than touching the fabric or talking to the customer. He was optimizing for all the wrong things.
And the biggest, most glaring example of the spreadsheet brain was the decision in 2019 to split the business in two.
The infamous split. They separated the dot-com business entirely from the physical stores. They literally made them two different companies.
I still struggle to wrap my head around this. Luxury is all about the seamless experience. I see it online, I go in store to try it on, I have it shipped to my house. Why would anyone build a massive wall between those two things?
It was a pure play for the stock market. At the time, tech companies were getting huge, massive valuations. Retailers were not. So they thought, hey, let's just pretend our website is a tech company.
Wow.
It was pure financial engineering just to chase what they call tech multiples.
But for the customer, how did that play out?
A total nightmare. Lilian explains how it confused vendors. They didn't know who they were selling to, and it alienated the customers. You cannot treat the website and the physical store as enemies in luxury. But Metric was chasing the stock price, not customer satisfaction.
And while he was doing that, he was firing the people who actually understood the soul of the business. Lilian specifically mentions Larry Bruce and John Krusky's store guys who were let go.
It is a massive brain drain. When you fire the people who know the top clients' birthdays and who know exactly which merchandise works in which city, you lose the institutional memory of the entire company. You lose the touch.
And then we really have to talk about the concession model, because this is where the math really explains why Saks stopped feeling special. We talked about consignment at Neiman's, but Saks took it to a whole other level.
This is crucial. Lilian breaks down the math provided by Tom Ott, a former senior vice president at Saks. And honestly, if you listen to nothing else today, listen to this, because it explains exactly why the business model broke.
Okay, let's walk through this slowly for everyone listening.
So in the old model, the wholesale model Saks would buy, say, a navy blazer for $50.
$50.
Right. They take the risk, they own the blazer, then they sell it on the floor for $100.
So they make a clean $50 profit. That is a 50% margin.
Correct. That's traditional retail. But in the concession model, Saks goes to the brand and says, we do not want to buy the blazer. You just rent space on our floor.
Okay.
You bring your own blazer, you hire your own staff, you design your own little booth. When you sell it for $100, we will just take a cut.
And what is that cut?
Lilian says it is typically between 6% and 15%.
Wait. So on that exact same $100 blazer, instead of making $50, Saks is now making $10.
Exactly. They traded high risk and high reward for low risk and absolute peanuts. They gutted their own revenue stream just to avoid buying inventory.
But it is not just the money, right? It changes the whole feel of the store.
Completely. This is what Lilian brilliantly calls the mall effect. When every brand runs its own concession, they design their own little booth. Saks loses its overarching voice. It stops being a curated collection chosen by an expert buyer.
Right. Lilian mentions that before, a buyer would go out and pick the best navy blazers from all different brands to build a cohesive collection for the Saks customer. Now
it is just a row of mini shops. If you closed your eyes and opened them, you wouldn't know if you were in Saks, Neiman's, or a high-end airport terminal. It is entirely generic.
it loses its soul.
The Saks identity is gone because the buyer isn't picking the best items anymore. The brands are just dumping whatever inventory they want to push onto the floor.
So you have Saks, which has become a generic mall run by spreadsheets making pennies on the dollar, and you have Neiman Marcus, which is operationally slightly better but completely drowning in debt and rotting from the inside.
And then, in December 2024, they merge.
The zombie merger.
Exactly. Richard Baker finally gets his wish. He combines them. But, as Lilian points out in her piece, when you combine two hollow shells, you don't magically get a solid structure. You just get a much bigger collapse.
And it happened fast.
Terrifyingly fast. Within 13 months of the merger, the new entity, Saks Global, was on life support.
And the vendors felt it first, didn't they?
They always do. Lilian notes that post-bankruptcy, Neiman's had actually been paying its bills fairly promptly. They had to, just to rebuild basic trust in the market. But when Saks took over,
It turned into slow paying.
and then eventually they stopped paying altogether.
That is the ultimate death knell in retail. When you stop paying the people who make the clothes, you have no clothes to sell.
And this connects right back to the broader pattern of Hudson's Bay Company, Baker's parent company. Lilian doesn't pull any punches here. She notes that HBC was literally the oldest company in North America.
Until Baker took it over.
Right. And what do? They stripped the assets. They mortgaged the flagship Saks store on Fifth Avenue for over $1 billion. They treated these retailers not as actual businesses that sell beautiful things to people, but just as real estate portfolios and financial instruments.
It reminds me of that quote Lilian includes from Neil Saunders at Global Data. He said, "Retailers should be run as retailers and not used as financial playthings."
That is the thesis of this whole disaster. You cannot engineer your way to luxury. You cannot spreadsheet your way to cool.
So, looking at all of this, what does this actually mean for us, for the consumer, for the industry as a whole?
It means that the era of the giant impersonal department store might be completely over, at least this specific version of it.
Because they forgot the single most important variable.
The customer. Richard Baker's math failed because he thought 55% market share was the win condition. He thought, if I own the market, they have no choice but to shop with me. It was pure arrogance.
But luxury shoppers always have choices.
They have infinite choices. They care about taste. They care about real curation. They care about walking into a store and feeling like someone understands their lifestyle and their needs. Saks and Neiman's sacrificed all of that for efficient spreadsheets and concession models.
They optimize the soul right out of the building.
And in luxury, the soul is really the only thing you are actually selling. If you lose that, you're just selling overpriced cotton and leather in a rented room.
It is a really sobering story. And honestly, we have only scratched the surface of the detail in Lilian's reporting today.
Wow.
If you want to really get into the gritty details and understand the exact mechanics of how this happened, you have to read the full article by Lilian Raji on Forbes.
It is a masterclass in business analysis, truly.
Definitely. And you should also check out her website at www.lilianraji.com. She has a ton of additional analysis on the luxury industry there. You can also connect with her on LinkedIn, follow her on Instagram, and subscribe to her YouTube channel. If you are interested in the actual business of luxury, she is a must follow.
Absolutely. Her insights on how emotional marketing works are worth the read alone.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We live in an era of extreme efficiency. Everything is about optimization, private equity, squeezing every last ounce of value out of a company. But this story makes me wonder, can true luxury, which is inherently inefficient, which is about excess and art and a deeply personal touch, can it ever really survive private equity ownership?
That is the billion-dollar question, or I guess in this case, the $4.9 billion debt question.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.